It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was an epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, and it was the winter of despair. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens opens with this phrase, and I find myself thinking about it a lot lately. It's one of those classic phrases that has somehow gotten only more poignant with time. Maybe the human experience is just so universal that phrases like this are bound to bridge the gap of centuries. Or better yet, maybe we've fallen into that classic trap where we forgot our own history and are doomed to repeat it. I mean, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, history keeps repeating itself before, right? Personally, I've never liked the phrase. It's really simple and reductive to how we kind of view our own collective story. I've always preferred the saying, history does not repeat itself, but it does often rhyme. It's a phrase often wrongfully attributed to Mark Twain. I know it best from Joseph Whitrick, but that's not the point. The point is that despite what it might seem at times, humanity never truly does repeat itself in history. Sure, there's lots of things that seem similar, but that doesn't make it a repeat. It'll always be different. Different circumstances, different outcomes, and different people and personalities involved. It's like cooking. Sure, you and I might follow the same recipe, make the same dish, and use the same ingredients, yet that human element of the chef, well, that can change everything about the outcome. For an example of this, look no further than the 20s, a century apart from the 1920s with lots of similarities, particularly pandemics, panic, and progress, but these similarities are definitely more coincidence than a true repeat. I mean, compared to the 1920s, the 2020s have been way less roaring. They've not been dull, not in the least, but in a real repeat, I'd kind of expect more, Art Deco revival and big band swing rather than isolation, war, and, well, whatever this was. But today, I want to focus on one specific element found within the hardships of the last few years. I want to explore an instance of collaborative art in the pandemic. Particularly, I want to explore how pandemic adversity combined with the virtually connected population in isolation was a demonstration in collaboration. Or put more plainly, how the Ratatouille TikTok musical is a perfect encapsulation of people's desire to be creative and highlights the importance of art in times of distress. Mostly, I want to talk about the importance of creativity to humanity, and then I'm going to show you how it dies. Okay, so first, we have to address the rat in the room. If you weren't on TikTok in August of 2020, you may have never heard tell of the Ratusical, or Ratatouille the Musical, which all spawned out of a joke video by Emily Jacobson. She wrote a fun little tribute song to Remy the Rat, the main character of Disney's 2007 movie Ratatouille. Like most TikToks in 2020, this was a flash-in-the-pan success for Jacobson. I mean, they weren't trying to be an influencer or content creator, they were just bored. Like lots of people who had the benefit of not being deemed essential by corporate America in the summer of 2020. They were just trying to keep occupied. And TikTok in 2020 was quickly becoming a new place to be. I mean, the days of Musical.ly had mostly faded into the background of 2019, and the pandemic supercharged its user base with lots of new users hungry for something different, or at least something to take their mind off of the global pandemic. Now, the app is still filled with lots of one-off viral videos today, and there were would-be content creators and influencers to be found in 2020 on the app. I don't mean to suggest otherwise, but it was all much more Wild West feeling than today's TikTok. To give perspective, the Creator Fund itself only started in June of 2020, limited to a select number of creators. Point being, it wasn't the juggernaut social media it is today. Many at the time wondered if it would just fail like Vine did, but beyond TikTok's growth as an app, my point here is to underscore that this all started on a very different TikTok and time than we're in now. Because the origins of this Ratusical are, for lack of a better word, grassroots. The the ball starts rolling from this silly meme video Emily made from her own boredom, which was then seen by Daniel Mertzluff, a composer, who, equally as bored, took Emily's song and rearranged it into the style of a finale ballad of a Broadway musical, poking fun at all the other Disney properties turned musical. And that video went even more viral, with a fairly simple premise that anyone could understand and get behind. The idea of, wouldn't it be funny if Disney tried to make Ratatouille into a musical too? As that video spread, gaining millions of views and thousands of others duetting and using the songs from that video to add their own input into the idea, it ballooned as a meme growing daily, with more and more people jumping on with their own bits and their own additions, but that's not unusual for TikTok. Most viral videos become viral sounds, with people making their own videos, and the whole joke spends a good week to a month in the limelight before fading off again into oblivion. But this time, things went a little differently, and the question becomes, how'd this go from meme to main stage? One critical element that propelled this joke into the reality of being a full-fledged musical was the pandemic. Not the illness itself, but rather the unforeseen consequences. COVID left a lot of people out of a job, laid off, or sat at home waiting for work to open again, which, I'm sure you were there, but one such group was actors, particularly Broadway actors. Now, I'm not talking about A-list celebrities singing John Lennon songs from their ivory towers. Oh, Pedro, I'm gonna give you a pass. I will. I'll assume this was your Wonder Woman co-star making you do it, and, the Princess Bride in your backyard makes up for it, but man, what a swing and a miss. But no, we're not talking about them. I'm talking about working actors, your background dancers, chorus line, bit part actors, and not just them, but the pit orchestra, the props department, the lighting team, and the list goes on and on. All of these cogs in the theater production machine were sat at home just like Daniel. And just like Daniel, they too thought, wouldn't it be funny if such a musical were made? They also had the talent to contribute, and contribute they did. Dozens of hundreds of literal thousands of videos were made by these groups, adding their own little spins and jokes on how this Ratusical might look, sound, and feel like. Choreography, lighting, acting, prop development, all were being done for a gag. But what if it wasn't just a joke? What if, unlike in normal times, the people feeding the flames of the joke had more free time than normal? Well, you know what they say about idle hands being playthings? It seems a play was just the thing for them. Or rather, the interest grew to such a point that someone had an idea, a spark to a flame, and in December of 2020, Seaview Productions announced a charity benefit concert presenting the full-fledged musical. What's interesting here is that so much had already been done, from songs being written to a playbill being designed, that it kinda seemed like a no-brainer. Seaview capitalized on this viral trend with hopes that some good would come out of it. Sure, this wouldn't be a musical to break new ground or win a Tony, but maybe they could use this to help raise some money for those theater troupe workers that the pandemic continued to hit so hard. And in true showbiz fashion, they said, hey, let's put on a show, and the proceeds would go to the Actors Fund. And honestly, it turned out great. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's the corniest, messiest, most insane attempt at a Disney musical I've ever seen, but the tunes are solid. And they even got some pretty big name talent to participate. Wayne Brady, Titus Burgess, Adam Lambert, Ashley Park, heck, even Andre DeShields, a Broadway legend, took on the villainous role of Anton Ego. But importantly, Seaview didn't just take the idea and run. Mertzluff was brought on as music supervisor. RJ Christian, who'd written songs imitating Alan Menken's style in his own TikToks, he was kept on. Even Emily Jacobson was kept as part of the process. Seaview didn't just want the idea. They wanted the authenticity of the creative minds behind the memes. You might think, well, duh, but it's not like these TikTok users were the creators of Ratatouille. They didn't need their permission to produce their own musical fundraiser with big-name talent. Because show business is a business that has certainly done that kind of thing before, so the intentionality to keep these people involved is not only a nice, touching story, but I think it talks to the spirit that made this musical work. Because like I said, this thing wasn't winning any Tonys, but it's still surprisingly really good. Like, actually well made, especially considering the confines it was produced in, which beyond the quality of the production is what I really wanted to talk about today. Hopefully you're still with me as we kind of get into this part of the topic, but the creation of this musical I think is worth talking about, not because it's some high art piece or a great charity fundraiser. It is amazing that they were able to fundraise millions of dollars for the Actor Fund with this project, but the Ratusical is worth remembering because it's a timestamp and example of collaboration in isolation. These circumstances of the pandemic that brought this musical to be were such that people craved not only entertainment, but a sense of purpose and creative outlet. So I think it's worth talking about as a project that was propelled by just the most human of instincts to create. I think when reflecting upon this time period, most of what can be said will be bad. It was, by all accounts, a horrible experience, so finding some of the good in retrospect is interesting to me. Because when push came to shove, people isolated here found community and purpose in this silly joke of a musical proposal. It's not about the content itself, but rather how the content reflects on the world, I guess. To recognize that creativity doesn't die in hardship, but can thrive in obscure and baffling ways. Like I said, no one set out with the intention to create a musical here, so then why was one able to be made? It wasn't just some overnight, whoops, we made a musical. This was a full production with themes, musical motifs, choreography. It's a production made under the oddest of circumstances with little to no barrier for entry. Nobody had to prove their credentials to be able to contribute to these choreography bits or musical themes. You just had to post a TikTok. And maybe that stands out more because of the subject matter itself. I mean, the idea of Ratatouille the movie is, at least in part, that anyone can cook. Everyone has a spark and the ability to create. It's a lovely message in and of itself, but here we see the message lived out in real time as effectively a monumental group project that got underway where anyone and everyone got to contribute towards the end product. Even if you made a TikTok that never became part of the full production, you were still part of something. You brought notoriety to the project, you maybe inspired someone else along the way. In any case, you helped propel the whole thing forward with momentum it needed to actually become a reality. Even though no one originally intended for that to be the case, but that's an insane thing to have happen, right? For a full musical to come out of a meme where no one actually thought or even necessarily wanted to make a musical. It was all done for a bit. It was a goof, a gaffe, a joke. And yet, an isolated global population shared in this experience of a pandemic and made a musical. Now, I don't mean to say all this as some wistful statement on humanity as a whole, but I find this project to have been so fundamentally interesting in terms of how we as people operate. Humans are social creatures is a classic statement of evolutionary history, one that you've probably heard a million times before, and it doesn't mean that all humans desire social interaction on a regular basis. Instead, it means that the evolutionary development of society and modern humanity is predicated on our ability to collaborate and share knowledge, experiences, emotions, and ideas. We work well off one another, and together can do great things we'd otherwise be unable to do, which that's all well and good for early irrigation and societal development, but what does that mean for us today, and what does that have to do with this project? Well, when provided ample time and forced into a situation of isolation like the pandemic, the results seem to be that we as humans gravitate back towards collectivity, towards creative efforts. And I think it's interesting to consider that the development of this musical in isolation was a creative outlet that allowed people to socialize in a way they were otherwise unable to at the time. Now you could say, well, the internet in general did that, which is true, but it's not every day the internet allows for the creation of a full-fledged musical. It's not every day that you or I could have contributed to a creative project that actual Broadway actors would participate in. This musical is semi-singular in that aspect. The internet has brought about lots of collaborations, opportunities, and provided creative outlets for people, but this project itself occurred at a time and in a way that broke down societal elements that would have otherwise constrained it. And no, I don't mean to say that the Reducical ended some sort of socioeconomic barrier in the arts or combated societal issues, but I mean, when else would you see a project like this, put together with such genuine care, get created, and in a way not dissimilar than you or I would film a class project or a silly film with friends? It was just made in a very strange time, and so the resulting project, in my opinion, is worth reflecting on. To that end, this project is a time capsule of a world that was uncertain about its future. August of 2020 held no horizon of the pandemic ending. There was no vaccine yet. In a setting like that, people need to find balance in their life. I mean, it's untenable to be constantly focused on major issues like a pandemic. If you became too consumed by it, you'd lose your mind, so people turned inwards, and this is one example of the creativity that came out of that turn. Now, that's all well and good, but you're probably wondering, so what? Why make a whole video on this project just to say, isn't it neat that in a pandemic, people got to be more creative and collaborative than normal? Well, I'm gonna quote Sandy Mann, a senior psychology lecturer at the University of Central Lancashire. They highlight two specific opposing factors necessary for creativity: stimulus and boredom. They say that people's response to boredom often determines whether they can harness creativity in times of solitude, stating, "Those who typically get their creativity from novelty might be more likely to turn to electronic devices in isolation, but the key is to let boredom develop first. If you actually let the boredom sit, your mind will wander and you will come up with a little bit more creativity." To me, this project feels like a perfect encapsulation of that idea, of boredom propelling an idea into a full-fledged musical, which is no small feat to accomplish, but TikTok in its infantile state seemed to offer the perfect way to do this with its collaborative feature of duets. All these people in isolation finally had something they could throw themselves into creatively. It's nothing perfect, but it's amazing that it turned out as well as it did. It's corny as can be, but this kind of says something about early TikTok, I think, as this space for collaboration and a platform that let people feel involved in creating. And I think maybe I just wanted to talk about this and make this video because I feel like creativity like that has become a bit of a novelty. It's taken for granted how creative that time period of the pandemic and online spaces allowed people to be. The pandemic causing people to flood these online spaces in search of outlets resulted in this project and this special moment of creative life. And I guess I worry that that can't happen again as the landscape changes. I don't worry because we aren't in a pandemic, nor do I think no one is creative online anymore, but my worries are that the online space feels like it's been tied to this seeming march towards the death of creativity and creative spaces. The hot button buzzword I could use to describe this would definitely be AI, the usage of which is on the rise in every artistic sector, but that's not entirely what I mean. Though there is something to be said that there wasn't AI-generated songs or concept art for what a Ratatouille musical would look like, because I do wonder, if made today, would this project never have gotten past the joke stage, where an AI voice generator would have been used to have Patton Oswalt's Remy from the movie sing these songs? But my point is that without projects like this, without shared communal spaces with passionate people, creativity dies. And the risk of that is real, not just because of AI and corporate exploitation. Lots of that's not new, but rather because you see legislated efforts being made against these new homes and hubs of creativity. And I don't just mean the efforts to ban TikTok. While that is a current issue, I'm speaking beyond that, to legislative issues of fair use, rampant copyright claims, DMCA notices, net neutrality, the list goes on. I think the Ratusical, for all its silliness, is this great demonstration of how art begets art, that everything is built on something else. While it's absolutely valid and important to ensure that people get credit for their work, there is constant and growing overreach to stop projects like this from ever happening. Look at YouTube versus Viacom, gaming emulators, Game Freak versus Pal World, music sampling, anything Nintendo's done ever, parody work. If we weren't in that pandemic setting, I would bet near anything that the Disney Corporation would have stepped in and prevented the full musical from ever being made. Even if it was for charity, I don't think it would have ever gone as far as it did. And I don't highlight this for the sake of the musical, it's about way more than this individual project. Having a space where people can create relatively freely and use ideas and IP that they would otherwise be unable to is important. Think of how many creative YouTube videos and YouTube channels you've seen taken down because of some copyright nonsense. Even when legally these videos would often fall under fair use. Look at TikTok this past year and muted audio from the corporate copyright claims. Silly edits of pop culture characters set to music may seem inconsequential, but hey, that was some kid getting to be creative and mess around with video editing and audio splicing. Is it Monet? No, but the act of being creative should never be something that we seek to quash. Because no one was truly harming music streams and sales by using a song for background music in a TikTok. The internet and social media are a great many things, but one thing they can and have been is a great equalizer. For better or worse, the average person today has the ability to collaborate and reach millions of billions of people across the globe. The creative liberation that has generated has made it easier than ever before to be a creative, to engage in art discourse and participate in creative spaces. Protecting these spaces as havens of fair use is essential, I think, in fostering creativity, innovation, and education. as it allows for commentary, criticism, research, and parody. Once upon a time, in 1831, US copyright was set at only 28 years. Prior to that, it was only 14. It wasn't until 180 years later, when Congress was lobbied in 1976 to pass the Mickey Mouse Protection Act, that copyright became 3/4 of a century long, or the life of the creator plus 50 years, whichever's longer. To put that in perspective on how that stifles cultural development, the rock and roll songs of the 50s and 60s that define early Americana, they could have never been built off the early blues and jazz standards they were with copyright like that. Earlier in this video, when I said I wanted to tell you how creativity dies, this is one of those ways. Creativity is not a beast able to be felled in one swing of a sword, but it can be brought to heel by 1,000 smaller cuts. But the good news is, it's pretty easy to save creativity and to keep it healthy. So if nothing else, I do hope this video will inspire you to continue to create. No matter how big, small, silly, serious, complete, or half-baked the idea is, do it. Be creative simply for the sake of it. It doesn't have to go anywhere. It might just be for you, for your friends, for some strangers online. Your project might even become a multi-million-dollar fundraiser. You never know what good might come out of your creativity. The happy accident and charitable project that was the Ratatouille musical was an event that's not likely to occur again, or at least not in the same way. History never truly repeats itself, after all. It was a product of a pandemic and a mass isolation of humanity. But as I've said, that's why it's worth talking about. It's worth highlighting that when the population of a planet was isolated to their homes, there were those that still sought the tradition of creating. It seems we are ever in odd times. However, as we see legislated efforts to ban platforms that were so integral to these experiences of people in isolation, it brings me pause, and I wonder, in retrospect, what we might lose from such an action. Whether or not a ban on TikTok is right or wrong as a choice is beyond the scope of this video. But I do think no matter what, this project is worth footnoting as an example of good that an app like TikTok brings into the world. The moral of the movie Ratatouille is that anyone can cook. And I think the moral of this musical is that anyone can create. I'll see you next time.